Animal Crossing New Horizons has sold over 40 million copies. How did this series go from a C-list Nintendo franchise to the best-selling game of all time in the country of Japan, outselling Pokemon, Zelda, and even Mario? Well, when the Animal Crossing series first began, it was a Japanese exclusive game made for the N64 released on April 14, 2001, called Dobutsu no Mori, which in English translates to Animal Forest, directed by the original Star Fox director Katsuya Iguchi and the Splatoon series producer Hisashi Nogami. Initially, Dobutsu no Mori was going to be something like a multiplayer RPG or adventure game, with a story, dungeons, and bosses. The main concept of the game, though, was communication. Remember that because it's going to be important for later. The game was planned to be released on the N64DD, a floppy disk drive add-on that provided the N64 with more storage for games, a real-time clock, and internet connectivity. However, the N64DD was, in the simplest terms, a complete flop, so Dobutsu no Mori had to be scaled down for the base N64. As a result, the developers had to think really hard about what was necessary to convey their main idea of communication. So they ended up scrapping the first concept of the game. Instead of being a game about going on adventures and fighting bosses, it became a life simulation game. You are a human who left their life back home to go to a faraway town filled with animals, and the game is about your life in your new town as you interact with the animals, make money, take on daily tasks, and, well, just live your life. Life Sim was a fairly untapped but rapidly growing genre at this point, with the rise of the virtual pet Tamagotchi games, the farm sim series Harvest Moon, and the very first The Sims game. This is one of the reasons why Animal Crossing ended up blowing up in popularity. While life sims were popular, the genre was still a relatively unexplored market, and part of that probably had to do with technological limitations. Games were very, very small prior to the 2000s, so game developers had extremely little space to work with. The biggest N64 games were only 64 megabytes. The biggest Super Nintendo games were only 6 megabytes, and the biggest NES games were only 756 kilobytes. As game consoles got more powerful, game developers had so much more freedom, and new types of games were able to exist. A game like Dobutsu no Mori just couldn't have existed on a Nintendo console prior to the N64, with all of the different NPCs, each with their own personalities, schedules, and items, and even then, like I mentioned, the development team still had to cut a lot of stuff to fit on the base N64. They ended up having to include a real-time clock in every copy of Dobutsu no Mori, which no doubt increased the cost of production. Luckily though, later that year, a new console came out that gave them the tools they needed to make their new series bigger and better. The Nintendo GameCube was released on September 14, 2001 in Japan, and only 3 months later, on December 14th, Dobutsu no Mori got an updated version on the GameCube called Dobutsu no Mori Plus. It was a great update that added in plenty of fresh content like new villagers, items, and holidays. Plus, the GameCube had a built-in real-time clock, so there was no need to make special cartridges for the game. The N64 was already on its way to the retirement home by the time the original Dobutsu no Mori was released, so it was a smart move to make an updated version for the GameCube. Whenever people buy a new system, they're usually fiending for some new games to play. So releasing Dobutsu no Mori Plus gave early GameCube adopters something cool to play that would last them an extremely long time. Dobutsu no Mori Plus is also worth mentioning because this version of the game is what ended up becoming the first ever Animal Crossing that we got outside of Japan, released on September 16th, 2002 in America, although it was significantly changed to fit Western culture. There was a small snippet of footage seen at E3 2001 when Nintendo showed off the game in a trailer featuring a bunch of upcoming GameCube titles, including a new Donkey Kong racing game, a new Zelda, and a new Mario Kart. Here, the game kept the English translation of the original game's title, Animal Forest. You can also see a shrine which was changed in the final localized version of the game into a wishing well. The game took 8 months to come stateside after the Japanese versions, which even for back then was a fairly long localization. For reference, other early 2000s Nintendo games like Super Mario Sunshine only took a month to be released in America. Wind Waker only took 3 months. And Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, full of JRPGs mind you, only took 4 months. But this long localization period was necessary. Animal Crossing is a game about communication, and the best way to communicate with someone is in an environment that's familiar to them. Obviously, Japanese media with heavy localization changes have a bad reputation thanks to the hilarious atrocities against humanity committed by 4Kids Entertainment and the original Persona, which when released in America not only completely changed characters' names, but also their skin colors. Whew. However, the changes Nintendo made in Animal Crossing weren't too crazy, and in fact, they enhanced the experience. A few new holidays were added that Americans would be more familiar with, like Valentine's Day and the Harvest Festival, which was basically a stand-in for Thanksgiving. The Nintendo Treehouse team did a fine job translating the game, changing references and jokes to make them understandable to English speakers. Turning on Animal Crossing, which was supposed to be your home away from home, would feel weird if you were suddenly exposed to holidays, events, and cultural norms that you had no understanding of. This was a game for 8-year-olds, not a 2000s anime fan sub with paragraphs of background information about the nuances and cultural context behind the Japanese language. And hey, the developers of the game seem pretty happy with the changes made in the localized version of Dobutsu no Mori Plus because they ended up releasing a new version of the game called Dobutsu no Mori E Plus, which added in the new holidays and e-reader support from the localized Animal Crossing, as well as some brand new stuff of its own. This extensive localization was a big success as it helped to establish that feeling of comfort. And comfort was a big reason why Animal Crossing got as big as it did. Iguchi realized that many of the games he made were difficult, but that is the point of most games, right? To provide an interesting challenge for the player to overcome, whether that's saving a princess, collecting all the monsters, or getting another human being to actually care about you. These games can be stressful. Animal Crossing, though, was relaxing. It's a game you play to chill rather than to get a thrill. And fortunately for Animal Crossing, the comfortable experience that it brought was about to become a hot commodity. Only a year and a half after Dobutsu no Mori E Plus was released on November 21st, 2004, the Nintendo DS came out. The DS helped to usher in a new era of video games, the age of the casual game. Nintendo caught on to a huge trend with the rise of casual gaming during the DS and Wii era of the mid to late 2000s. All types of people were beginning to play video games, not just boys. Girls, dads, grandmas, everyone was starting to get into the gaming scene. As a result, more casual, comfortable games that anyone could pick up and play began to surge in popularity. Nintendogs, Wii Sports, Brain Age, Big Brain Academy, Art Academy, Clubhouse games, Personal Trainer, cooking, the list goes on. And luckily, Animal Crossing lodged itself comfortably on that casual game train. The next game in the series, Oideyo Dobutsu no Mori, was released on November 23, 2005 in Japan, and less than 2 weeks later it was released in North America as Animal Crossing Wild World. Wild World was the second game in the series if you don't count the various updated ports and localized versions of the first game. Unfortunately, being on a weaker handheld console meant once again, Nintendo had to drastically cut content. The town you lived in was smaller, there were less villagers in your town, going from 15 to just 8, and there were less villagers overall, going from over 300 possible villagers if you include the islander animals in Dobutsu no Mori E Plus, to less than half that with only 150 possible villagers. And that's not even all of the things they cut. But even with all the stuff Nintendo removed, the game ended up becoming a massive success, selling over 11 million copies. What made Wild World such a success was even though they cut out a lot of stuff, it's what they added that ended up mattering the most. The Nintendo DS had built-in Wi-Fi connectivity, so Nintendo added in online multiplayer to Wild World. The original Animal Crossing had local multiplayer, but it wasn't real time. Only one person could play on the console at a time, so the only multiplayer aspect was seeing what the other people in your family did in your town while you were gone, or seeing someone else's town by loading up another memory card with their data. The multiplayer was very awkward. Wild World fixed this issue, allowing you to play with other people either locally or all across the world with Wi-Fi. Wild World made it easier for you to communicate with other people. Wild World was so popular that it ended up getting a full-length animated movie, which unfortunately never made it out of Japan. Outside of a weird port of the first Animal Crossing to the Chinese iQ player console, the next game in the series was the franchise's debut on Nintendo's next home console, the Nintendo Wii, with Animal Crossing City Folk released on November 16, 2008 in America, a day before it came out in Japan, where it was called Machi e Ikoyo Dobutsu no Mori. Being on a more powerful home console meant content removed from Wild World could be brought back along with new stuff like the titular city where all sorts of shops reside, and the ability for Japanese and international versions of the game to interact. Probably the most interesting new addition was the ability to use voice chat in multiplayer with the Wii Speak peripheral that came in a bundle with the game. City Folk, unfortunately, wasn't anywhere near as popular as Wild World. Many criticized it for its lack of new features or innovation. Fortunately, this was only a momentary setback because the next game in the series would get the franchise back on track. Tobidase Dobutsu no Mori was released on November 8, 2012 in Japan, and 7 months later it was released in America as Animal Crossing New Leaf on June 9, 2013. This game was the title that brought Animal Crossing from just another successful Nintendo IP to a household name. Animal Crossing fans weren't the only ones talking about this game. The wider gaming community began to pick up on the series. It went on to sell over 13 million copies, surpassing Wild World as the most sold game in the series at the time. If you ask me why New Leaf managed to be so profitable, well, it's because the game was better. Sometimes there's no clever strategy or trick to being successful, it's just making a good product. The art style was updated, making it more appealing and detailed. There were new villager personalities, more decoration options, better online features, more storage, and most importantly, allowing you to be the mayor of your town. Being the mayor gave you far more control over how you wanted your town to look and function thanks to public works projects and ordinances. New Leaf wasn't just a fantastic game for Animal Crossing fans, it was a fantastic game in general. Okay, so I kinda lied a little bit earlier. New Leaf being a great game wasn't the only reason this game did so well. I think Nintendo put a lot more effort into marketing this thing. There was a full trailer at E3 2011. It was featured in Nintendo's February 14th, 2013 Direct, and in Japan, New Leaf got a full 45-minute long Nintendo Direct. Then, of course, we can't forget that 2 days after New Leaf launched in America, Nintendo unveiled the first ever trailer for Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U, and in that trailer, they announced the very first newcomer, Villager from Animal Crossing. Nintendo knew that this series had a lot of potential, and well into the 3DS and Wii U era, they milked the heck out of this series. Villager debuted in Smash in 2014, Animal Crossing DLC in Mario Kart 8 in 2015, Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer in 2015, Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival in 2015, Animal Crossing New Leaf Welcome Amiibo Update in 2016, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp for iOS and Android in 2017, then on September 13th, 2018, in a Nintendo Direct, we got the reveal for Isabelle in Smash. And if that wasn't awesome enough, right after that trailer ended, we got a teaser for Animal Crossing New Horizons, then called Animal Crossing 2019. Atsumare Dobutsu no Mori, or Animal Crossing New Horizons, was released worldwide on March 20th, 2020. New Horizons was, well, awesome. A new crafting system, landscaping to drastically change your island, placing furniture outside, even better online features, and of course the tons of updates that added holidays, characters, and items. But even with all of these great improvements, jumping from 13 million to 40 million is still an insane leap in terms of sales. How was New Horizons that much more popular than New Leaf? Well, let's address the elephant in the room. In early 2020, the world shut down and people were locked in their houses with nothing to do, and New Horizons was a brand spanking new game to play. We were all distanced from each other, but Animal Crossing allowed us to once again hang out with our friends, to gather together, to communicate. Despite living in a world where the internet allows for people to connect with one another all over the globe, a ton of people still feel lonely. Loneliness was the reason why Animal Crossing even began in the first place. When Iguchi first joined Nintendo, he had to move over 300 miles from Chiba to the city of Kyoto, where Nintendo's headquarters were, and he was only 21 years old. He went to Kyoto without any of his friends or family, and it made him feel extremely lonely. During that time, he worked on big games like Super Mario Bros. 3 and Yoshi's Story, establishing himself as a big name at Nintendo, but what he missed was communication. So he made Animal Crossing as a way to replicate that feeling of separation that he felt, the feeling of going somewhere far off to a town where you don't know anyone, but allowing you to form new bonds, new friendships, and new families.